You are tuned into another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. Once again, the Royals are going to have to shake up their front office. I'm going to tell you why the Gold Glove Award is now just a joke. And lastly, what are my expectations for Matt Quatraro in year two? That's all coming up next on Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for tuning in to another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. You can always follow me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. And be sure to catch all of these podcasting episodes on wherever you get your podcasts. That can be Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, and on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. If this is your first ever episode tuning in to Locked On Royals, of course, welcome in. Before you go any further, hit that subscribe button on YouTube. And if you already have, send it to somebody who hasn't. We want to make this thing as big as it can possibly be. The way we can do that is with you and the listeners and the followers, first-time listeners, long-time listeners, doesn't matter. We want to grow this thing, and that subscribe button is a big way in doing it. But if you're wondering who I am, how I came to be the host of Locked On Royals, well, I'm just a diehard fan of the Royals. I have fun covering them. My job actually entails that I cover this team. I work in Kansas City at Sports Radio 810 WHB. I've got a morning show on ESPN Kansas City, a night show on Sports Radio 810 WHB. So I stay pretty busy with my work life and this podcasting life when covering the boys in blue, the Kansas City Royals. Usually during the season, it varies from time to time, but I go to the games, get media coverage up in the press box. You can always, check me out on Twitter there, of course, at JohnnyJ_15. I'll go down to the locker room afterwards, the clubhouse. I'll get audio from players. And we expect to have that grow a little bit more once the 2024 season rolls around. But first things first, we got to make sure this podcast is rolling by that time again. We don't want to be in the same place that we were back in, July and August. We want this thing to be up to 1,000 subscribers. We want the Twitter followers to be high. We want the views to be high. And we know we're going to get there. And we know that a lot of it also depends on the Royals being interesting. And today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. And, of course, right now, the interesting teams in baseball, the ones that are still playing. And you look at the American League Championship Series, the National League Championship Series. I'm going to give you my picks for some of the weekend games that are upcoming in that championship series. Of course, as I'm recording right now, the Phillies and Diamondbacks are tied up 1-1, at least last time that I checked. Of course, it'll be done by the time this podcast posts, but it's been a fun Major League Baseball postseason, and we want the Royals to get back up to that point. And maybe one day, one of our sleeper picks will involve postseason baseball with the Kansas City Royals. But I just talked about being interesting, and we're going to get a lot of our followers, a lot of new subscribers, if this team does something worthwhile. If this team makes a splash in free agency, if this team makes a big trade, if somebody gets cut, a coach is fired, you'll come to the Locked On Podcast Network and you will watch that podcast episode. Those views will be high. One of our highest viewed episodes was, I believe, during draft week. The takeaways from the Major League Baseball draft, when the Royals call up somebody, when the Royals, have a guy that's performing at a high rate. People want to see that. You want to see the engagement. You want to see the high volume of listeners, and that happens just by randomness. If your team does something, if your team spends money, and I think today, at least I was blessed with a pretty good first segment here, and the Royals having to shake up their front office a little bit. And I think it's something that's not small. And I kind of have a big time look at this whole type of move and the moves they've been making over the last 2 months or so. In fact, I'm going to go back as far as a year on what the Royals have done to their front office. Now, it was reported by Ken Rosenthal earlier today that Jin Wong, the Royals' assistant general manager for baseball administration, is leaving the organization after 24 years on his own accord. The sources told The Athletic, and that came out earlier today at 4:33 p.m. Central Time. This is a bigger move than you think. Now, of course, it's not firing that would have been labeled there in the tweet. It seems like Either Wong wants to walk away from baseball or he maybe wants to go work somewhere else. We'll probably get more details on that as the months go. But now when you kind of think about it, when you take a step back and really evaluate what the Royals have done over the last year, they fired Dayton Moore. So that was not a leaving on his own accord. The Royals fired Dayton Moore. So you have the GM and the president of baseball operations spot open up, or at least the president of baseball operations spot open up. They promote JJ Picollo. Of course, people still have their reserves about JJ Picollo. They've got their question marks about JJ, and he had been in the organization for a long time. But that's replacing Dayton Moore, who had been with the team since 2006. Then we find out, I believe it was last month, Gene Watson is leaving the Royals to go take a job elsewhere. And then now we find out that Jin Wong is going to be leaving the organization as well. I mean, we can talk about, the front office not making many changes. There is going to be some different influence in this organization. And Brian Bridges joining this club is already a pretty big deal. That's a guy who had big-time influence in Atlanta, that had a big-time influence in San Francisco. And now, I'm not saying that it's going to be groundbreaking, but you can find somebody to fill Wong's role that has outside influence, that's not directly related to Kansas City. And that can better your front office and decision-making. That can better this group and player development. I mean, I really don't think that one move here or there is going to drastically change a team. We saw in 2023, the Royals made a barrage of coaching hires. They just didn't stop hiring people. They fired a lot of people. They brought in a lot of new people. Team lost 106 games, tied a franchise record. So just moves like that doesn't always make an immediate change. It's more so over time. Different voices come in, different minds get together. They think alike. Maybe they think differently. But what is important in this grand scheme of things is that the Royals are going to have different influence. They are going to have fresh blood into their front office. They can always promote within, but that also kind of feels like a role the Royals can hire from elsewhere, the outside world, another team, another club, and that can better you. Because what we have seen with the Royals for 2 decades is a lot of the same people. And of course, there's going to be people out there still going, well, JJ Picollo needs to go. He's just the brainchild of Dayton Moore. I'm still willing to give it another year to see what type of talent is added to this system. And I would like to see the Royals with an opening like this with Jin Wong, is that you can go and hire somebody from an organization that finds a lot of talent. And I don't mean finding talent through a lot of money spending. I mean what the Rays do. I mean what Baltimore has done. I mean what the Diamondbacks have done. That type of influence, that's important, especially with where the Royals are at right now. But this is just going to be a sign of things to come. I think the Royals are kind of having more turnover than maybe we initially thought. I mean, you go back 365 days, a lot of top voices in this front office are now gone. I mean, Dayton Moore, Gene Watson, and Jin Wong had all been in the organization for a long time. And if Brian Bridges' hiring tells us anything, it means that the Royals are starting to look outside the organization to fill certain roles. And that's important. And that shows to me that this club understands to get better, you have to start thinking differently. You can't just value everybody in your organization. That's not to say they're bad employees or they're bad at their job. But sometimes in the state of the rebuild, you need guys that know how to fix the rebuild. In every organization out there, there are employees, there are personnel that can tailor to a specific type of team. If you hire somebody from New York, per se, there is a chance that all that front office member knows, all that employee knows, all that coach knows is winning. They don't know what a rebuild is like. And a rebuild in New York is just spending more money or spending less money to save up on payroll, or you can't afford to pay that player, which is just kind of stupid in general because the Yankees have never failed to not pay a player. They can pony up just about as much money as they've ever could have dreamed of. But that's kind of what I'm getting at. With the Royals, there may be people in the organization that were part of one way of things done. I would say that a rebuild was done a certain way. You stick to that way. That's kind of what I'm trying to get at here. Stumbled over my words a little bit. But The Royals did a rebuild a certain way. And when you have the same minds, the same voices that were a part of that rebuild and want to do it the same way, you have to understand baseball's different. It's not going to be done the same way. You can't always fix things as it was back then. The Royals had one of the best farm systems in baseball. You don't have it right now. You have to go a different route. And to bring in people who know how to build it quicker than the one you have now. And I'm not saying that Jin Wong was a part of the problem. I'm not saying Gene Watson was a part of the problem. I think everybody at hand in where the Royals are at right now. But the way you can fix things is getting different minds. You have to continuously try to solve the problem. And whoever the Royals replace Wong with, you're hoping that you can add them to the front office and they think differently. They think like Brian Bridges. They're bringing in different influence. And that's what I would love to see. That, to me, is important when filling some of these front office roles. Okay, the next thing I want to dive into is something that we've all been very upset about in Kansas City over the last 2 days, and that was the Gold Glove finalist, and not a single Royal was a finalist for the award. I'm going to tell you why the Gold Glove Award is now officially just stupid. That's next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. Follow me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. Before we go any further, let's give a shout out to one of the title sponsors today in Sleeper. I told you I've got some picks for the upcoming weekend, but I'm just going to look ahead to tomorrow night, and this will be Game 4 of the American League Championship Series the Texas Rangers against the Houston Astros, and you have two aces on the bump in Jordan Montgomery and Justin Verlander. I really think this is going to be an old-school pitcher's duel. Nobody's been able to hit Jordan Montgomery, and you could probably say the exact same about Justin Verlander. And just overall, his experience has shown that it is proving to be a big-time bonus for the Astros in the postseason, especially with the way their rotation has been pitching all year long. But you got JV, you got Jordan Montgomery, Gumby as they call him. I think it's going to be a good night for both these guys. So I will take Jordan Montgomery to throw more than 5 innings in this game and amass more than 5 strikeouts for the Texas Rangers. As for JV, I'll take him to go 6 innings in this game, but just get more than 4 strikeouts. He was very good his last time out. Didn't really get the strikeout numbers, but I think he's going to get just enough in this game. Probably going to be decided by 1 or 2 runs, but I'm just going to stay in my lane for now. I think it's going to be a very good outing for both Gumby and JV tomorrow night in Arlington. Now, with Sleeper, the MLB playoffs are in full swing, which means the clock is ticking on your chance to 100 times your cash on daily fantasy baseball. Baseball has never been more exciting than it is right now with studs like Ronald Acuna Jr., Mookie Betts, and Shohei Ohtani. Pick more or less on stats for these stars like home runs, hits, strikeouts, and more for up to 100 times the payout on Sleeper. Get your picks right, and you could win big with Sleeper. I don't want to get too caught up when a team loses this many games. So when you lose 106 games, baseball has a right to ignore you. Okay, as much as it pains me to say that, as much as it sucks to hear for Royals fans, when you lose that many games, there is a high percentage baseball doesn't really care about you. Bobby Witt Jr. was phenomenal this year. But if Bobby Witt Jr. was on a team that made the postseason, I mean, you're talking about national brand recognition. We are talking about a young superstar, not just in the Midwest. We're talking about globally. I mean, the name Bobby Witt Jr. And of course, I think most baseball fans know who he is. But the crazy thing about this all is, as good as Bobby Witt Jr. was, I mean, top 15 in F4 this season, I mean, fantastic defensively. Isn't it crazy to think that as good as he was, he's going to finish this year with basically no accolades, not any significant ones at that. I mean, no all-star recognition, no Gold Glove, no Silver Slugger. And that's very unfortunate because he was deserving of at least one of those awards. I mean, the first half wasn't that great for Bobby Witt Jr., so understood not getting named to the All-Star team. I fully expect him to get it next year. I fully expect him to get a Gold Glove next year. I fully expect him to, at some point, win a Silver Slugger award because of how good he is offensively for the shortstop position. But back to the point, you lose that many games, you're not going to get the recognition that you're wanting. And that's just baseball. It's the way it's always been. When you win a lot of games, When you get more interesting, your players are put on a map. Cole Reagans and Bobby Witt Jr. are really the only players that got that recognition. Because of what Reagans was doing, he was a part of a big trade for Texas, who, of course, is now in the American League Championship Series, so it mattered to the rest of baseball fans out there. But there's a reason you don't hear Maikel Garcia's name a lot. There's a reason that Vinny Pasquantino, who we all believe here in Kansas City is a guy that can be a multiple-time All-Star, he's not getting that recognition yet because the Royals are not winning many games. That, you hope, is going to change because these guys are good enough to build a winning culture in Kansas City. It's just going to take a little bit more time than maybe we're hoping it to be. Maybe they're far more competitive next year. Maybe they can get to that 80-win threshold, but I'm going to wait and see what they do in this offseason. However, even without the recognition, you're not getting the national talk. It's a sham that the Gold Glove Award is based on what it's based on. And I know that it's voted on by players and managers, so you have guys that watch games. And a lot of that, I feel like for managers, old school managers, it's eye test. I just don't even know how you look at Bobby Witt Jr. and Maikel Garcia and Michael Massey and not think they're at least a finalist. I mean, I don't think that the guys that were put at shortstop, the guys at second base and third base are bad options. But I compare some of the advanced metrics for Bobby Witt Jr. and Carlos Correa. I'm giving the nod to Bobby Witt Jr. Michael Massey, maybe a little bit more hesitant on, but Maikel Garcia was arguably the best defensive third baseman in the American League. To not even be a finalist is a joke. It is. And I think we've known for a while the Gold Glove Award is a joke. And it's also benefited Kansas City before. I mean, Salvador Perez had a couple of really good years behind the plate. I think his 2013 year was phenomenal. That was very deserving of a Gold Glove Award. But there were also some years I'm going, man, you look at pitch framing, you look at his blocking numbers, some of the really nitty-gritty baseball savant FanGraph numbers did not support Salvador Perez, like at all. And now you look at it, he's one of the least valuable catchers in all of baseball. You're talking about, though, a 7-time, 8-time Gold Glover here. So it has benefited Kansas City before. Alex Gordon won multiple Gold Gloves in the outfield. You could definitely argue very deserving. I think the year Andrew Benintendi won the Gold Glove, I didn't think the advanced metrics supported him that much. He pretty much was even, which goes to show you when it's voted on, a lot of it kind of is eye test, for lack of a better term here. There's some metrics I think they look at, but I kind of go across the board here with finalists. Like Carlos Correa doesn't look the smoothest over there, but he just makes all those plays. Incredibly strong arm. And also, the Twins won their division. National recognition there. You know who Carlos Correa is because of his presence, what he's done in the past. Easy to make him a finalist. If you're asking me, this was the year they deserved it more than past years, past teams, past players. I mean, Bobby Witt Jr., eye test, metrics supported that he should be a Gold Glove finalist. Maikel Garcia, same exact thing. Even Michael Massey. But back to the point, you lose 106 games, you're not going to get the recognition. And you're hoping that turns things around because we saw on Twitter, Maikel was upset. Bobby Witt was upset. Salvador Perez was upset. But Sally was more so upset for those guys because they were deserving. You can't look at the numbers and say they're not a Gold Glove finalist. But it is what it is. What I kind of have chalked it up to, it's not really that important of an award anymore. It sounds good. It's just like in the NFL, Pro Bowler sounds really good. It's kind of a hollow meaning at this point. All pro is what you shoot for in the NFL. Pro Bowler, you have guys filling all the time. Like Mac Jones for the Patriots is a Pro Bowler. We know what Mac Jones looks like. No disrespect to him, but I'm just saying. Gold Glove Award, I mean, those pass. Unless you win multiple, unless you're Nolan Arenado, you're Alex Gordon in Kansas City, or Salvi in Kansas City, it kind of is forgotten about a couple years later. And I do fully expect, once the Royals start winning, and if Maikel Garcia, Bobby Witt Jr., and Michael Massey are still the infield of the Royals, they're going to get that recognition. They will be there. Eye test and advanced metrics, data, all of that. It's going to support them being a finalist. But right now, I kind of chalk it up as it's a dumb award, and the Royals lost 106 games. And when you lose that many times, you're not going to get the votes. You're not going to get the recognition that you're hoping for. But again, light that fire, fuel the anger, and go win a couple next year. When I mean a couple, I mean multiple players win one Gold Glove award. And I think they will. Not really too concerned about it. That's a very good defensive infield. And you can make a case that going into next year, it is the best infield in all of baseball in terms of defensive metrics. Okay, the last thing we're going to dive into is my expectation for Matt Quatraro in year 2. Is this the final year he gets? And how early do I need to see success? I'll tell you next on Locked On Royals. You are tuning to Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. You can follow me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. Before we go any further, let's give a shout out to the other title sponsor today in Jase Medical. Now, I would say in my lifetime, I haven't had any experiences that were near death, nothing severe like that, but you always want the cushion. You want the security, and Jase Medical really provides that for you. I've been on vacations out of the country where something happens and you need medical attention immediately, and you don't always get it. You're having to constantly worry, what hospital are you going to? You know, what antibiotic do you need? And Jase Medical takes care of all of that. And just because I haven't experienced something near death, I've been in situations that were scary for other people, and you don't want to have to worry about where to go from here. Am I covered and stuff like that? Jase Medical has you covered because modern medical care and treatment are important, but our global supply chains are fragile. Things like pandemics, natural disasters, and foreign travel may cut you off from the treatment you need. Jase Medical is your solution. Just fill out their online form, and one of Jase Medical's board-certified physicians will review it to determine whether medications are safe and appropriate. Then Jase will send your prescriptions to one of their partner pharmacies where your order will be filled and mailed directly to your home. You can also send your physician a message for answers to treatment-related questions anytime. Everyone should be empowered to care for themselves and their loved ones during the unexpected. That's why Jase Medical offers the Jase case. Save more than $360 by getting these life-saving antibiotics with Jase Medical Plus, an additional $20 off by using my code LOCKEDON at checkout on jasemedical.com. That's JASE Medical.com. There's going to be a lot of talk going into spring training about what Matt Quatraro is expected of in 2024. And we all understand that rebuilds can take time. But fans, I think, need to see significant improvement if we are to buy into this rebuild 2.0, if you will. I think the best way to call it. If you don't improve your win total by at least 15 games, I would say, I think you're going to lose a lot of support in Kansas City. And I think that's when the seat is going to get a lot hotter for Q. And also another thing that is going to, I think, really impact the direction and the feelings toward the Royals organization is how this team fares in April. If you stumble out of the gates after losing 160 the year before and you get fans to lose interest, stop showing up, it's going to be hard to reel them back in. Because there were people out there vocally saying Matt Quatraro doesn't deserve a second year. I mean, you lose that many games, I don't need to see any more. You clearly are inexperienced. You show no passion. You know, and that's kind of thing that goes against Matt Quatraro. He's not a fiery guy. I don't buy into that too much because Mike Matheny was an incredibly passionate and fiery guy, and the Royals were just as bad. Maybe not record-wise, but in terms of watchability, it was kind of the same to me. But I always felt like I stayed pretty firm on my stance of I got to see year 2. You get to June and July of year 2 and you're 30 games under 500. Okay, then maybe I do have my answer that you just can't manage this team. I also wanted to see what does this team look like? How are they managed when they actually have more players out there that are big leaguers, not just a bunch of 4A guys in an evaluation year. And I think there were more than a handful of 4A guys playing for the Royals this year. Bullpen, rotation, lineup. There were still studs on this team, but you can't win that many games with 2 or 3 guys. And when they're not all in the same or on the field at the same time, that's going to show. And it did this year. I do think there were some positives. I think we saw the rotation find some stability once Cole Reagans joined it. We saw the bullpen get a little bit better in September. The lineup had its flashes, but overall consistency was a big-time problem. And I think some of that does fall on Matt Quatraro, how you're managing certain games. I mean, when you have a bad bullpen, I don't really think you should come down that hard on a manager when there's not many guys to turn to. And managers are always going to be blamed for losses, right? If you go to a guy in the 8th inning and they blow that lead, who's the blame put on? Maybe not the player, maybe it's the manager. And I would say more often than not, it was put on Matt Quatraro. However, I am going into year 2 with a little bit more heat, a little bit more intensity. I have to see mentally and physically a much different team than when we saw them back in March. I got to see a team that can come out of the gates a little bit hotter, a little bit more competitive. I mean, the Royals from April to September looked outmatched by nearly everybody. And if they won those games, I felt like they got them on that night. It wasn't like that's the much better team out there. They had their win streaks, they had their series wins, but overall, we all know that they were outmatched in a lot of those games. You build more of a competitive culture and a team that doesn't slip up 7 or 8 times in a row in the first month of the season. Now you got me thinking a little bit more, okay, I can buy into what you're doing. But if we get to June and July and this team is in last place and they're 15 or 16 games out of first, okay, I think I may have seen enough. And I don't think J.J. Picollo would make a move midseason, not unless the Royals were 8-42 or something like that, just an absurd record. But I do think if they lose 100-plus games again, then you really do have to evaluate, is this the guy we want at the helm? I looked to Miami. They made a couple of key moves, and Skip Schumacher in year 1 took that team to the playoffs. They didn't go very far. They were hammered by Philadelphia, but I guarantee every Royals fan would take a wild card series appearance next year if they could. It's going to depend a lot on what ownership does, the moves they make, and then it goes into Matt Quatraro's corner of, okay, what can you do with this team? What can you show me? If you can assemble a semi-competitive roster and win us 80 to 85 games, now I'm all the way bought in. Because think about it. In 2021, the Royals signed Andrew Benintendi or traded for Andrew Benintendi, signed Carlos Santana, signed Mike Minor, signed a couple of bullpen guys, won 74, 75 games. And that was with Mike Matheny at the helm. Like that to me feels bare minimum right now. Like you could go out there and win 75 games with moves like that. So if you make a little bit more of those moves, a little bit more competitive moves, now my expectation and my goals are a little bit different. The goal and the expectation were near the bottom last year. I mean, I just didn't go into the year expecting Matt Quatraro to win 80 to 85 games then. I knew deep down, as much as I tried to convince myself it wasn't true, it was going to be very ugly. Because there were a lot of guys that needed to prove they were big league ball players, and some just didn't. It's just as simple as that. And when you have a bullpen out there that has guys that may never see the light of day in the big leagues again, it showed why you lost 106 games. It showed why the bullpen's ERA was, league worst. The whip was league worst. Walk rate, league worst. I mean, that's going to eventually just kind of fall in line of, okay, the players are just not very good. Now, managerial decisions certainly factor in. And there were times I questioned, what is Matt Quatraro doing going to this guy? Or why is he putting out a lineup like this? I had my questions. I also had times where I go, okay, do you want to go to on a night where like Carlos Hernandez isn't available, James McArthur isn't available? Yeah, it frustrated me if they went to Taylor Clark to close out a game or hold a one-run lead, but who else would I rather have out there? There weren't many guys to turn to. And the lineup, if they gave Maikel Garcia a day off and Matt Duffy was in there, it's not as fun as it was if Maikel Garcia was in there. But at the end of the day, is there really anybody else that needs at-bats there? Sure, maybe Nick Lofton. Maybe Nick Lofton has the day off and Matt Duffy or Matt Beatty was there, but it's the end of the year. Not everybody can play every single day. And I just kind of want to reserve my expectation until I see a team that's assembled that can be competitive. If you do it this offseason, my bar raises. And it can continue to raise all the way up into April. I could start right here at about, I expect 70 wins. You sign a couple of guys, it goes up to 75. Sign a couple more, trade a couple more, goes up to 70 or 78, maybe 79, you get to 80. And that's kind of where I'm at right now. 70 wins. You return this same team, had Vinny Pasquantino back, couple of minor league deals, 1-year deals. Yeah, 70 wins. You make a little bit more of a splash. Now we're talking about an 80 to 85 win team. Now it's going to take some pretty big splashes, but that's kind of where I'm at right now. I'm Matt Quatraro. If you agree with me, let me know in the comments below. If you disagree, of course, let me know in the comments below, either on YouTube or on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. That's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. And last time, follow me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. Until tomorrow for our Mailbag Friday segment, you take it easy, Kansas City.